Hello, beautiful mums.
Hi, everyone.
It's Dr. Nat and Leigh from Love Your Beautiful Brain, and we are talking today to the fabulous Dr. Ron Swatzyna. Ron is the Director of Electroneurophysiology Research and Neurotherapy. That's a mouthful, Ron. At the Tarnow Centre for Self-Management in Houston, Texas. And he has analysed and treated the most diagnostically challenging cases in both inpatient and outpatient settings. He's also a researcher and has presented many peer-reviewed papers on brain dysfunction and other related topics at national and international conferences. In other words, he's a very busy man. And we are very grateful for your time today, Ron, to talk about the topic of screen time and online gaming and the effect these are having on our children. So thank you very much.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. I always enjoy doing these things with you and taking times out to help teach the mothers. You know, they really need all the help they can get.
They really do. They really do. Look, as you know, we've got an online program called Love Your Anxious Child. And in this program, we talk about the biopsychosocial model and how this model helps us to get to the root cause of a child's anxiety. And what I'd like to do today is to talk about screen time and gaming addiction in that same light. The way that most people are talking about it today seems to be with regard to blaming the parents. Now, this is all the parents' fault. But we...
Or mum's fault, usually.
Yeah, mum's fault.
Poor mum.
Mums always get the blame.
That's right.
But look, we know in our clinic, the children that we see that have the most significant issues with regard to having trouble coming off screens or having issues with gaming addiction are the ones that have the most challenging presentations in terms of what we see in their brain and what we see for them biologically in terms of their DNA and bloods.
Genetically as well.
Yeah. So we know that these kids, that there's something going on for them. It could be very much a chicken and the egg presentation, but my feeling is that it's not, that these children already had this presentation and then they're presented with this
very highly addictive,
entertaining things, and then that weakness that they have within their own biology exposes them to the risks of addiction. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, there was a study out of Seattle, probably 10, 15 years ago, that found that every hour a child that was set in front of a TV or a video, which started, back in the 90s, increased their likelihood of having ADHD by 9% for every hour in front of the TV. So, and this is something pretty common, with little Einstein and with Big Bird and things like this. It was a way to entertain your children while you're trying to get something done. And at the same time, we got to understand the brain is a very adaptive mechanism for protecting itself, for modifying itself to its environment. Now, you take the stimulation from videos and from, let's take Big Bird dancing around and all sorts of large movements and everything else, and we see that the brain has to put in filters not to be overwhelmed. And these filters keep the brain from being overstimulated. So I always give the example, if you took a child from New York City and sent him to an Idaho potato farm and traded that boy from the Idaho potato farm to New York City, the New York City boy would be so bored and the Idaho potato farm boy would be so anxious because there'd be so much stimulation. Their brains weren't prepared for the different environments. So that, I think, is truly where it starts. Two-dimensional TV videos, computer games and everything else are really very stimulating. Even remember the old monochrome screens when you would take a movie or a video of them, they would flash. Well, the flashing still occurs, but we can't see it anymore, but it occurs in our brain. So this is one of the things I know. There is a predisposition. There's a book by Rossi called The Psychobiology of Human Gene Expression. And you're right, I think there's a certain number of these children that have this gene that is waiting to be turned on. And there is a predisposition towards, just like there's a predisposition towards alcoholism or gambling or anything else. It's just in their nature. As long as they're never exposed to it, then we don't have to worry about that gene getting turned on. But if they are, it really is. It's going to be tough.
Yeah.
So that's so we're looking at it not only from a nurture, but from a nature perspective.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, look, absolutely. And because the way we look at genes in clinic is, you might have a certain genetic profile, which makes you susceptible to things, but it depends on lifestyle and environment as to whether those susceptibilities will actually come into play. But I think in our society, gaming is such a big part of our environment.
And screens generally,
Yeah, in general, are such a big part of our environment. So those children with the DRD2 gene mutation or the MAOA gene mutation or the COMP gene mutation, they're all going to be more susceptible to being exposed to screens and then going on into addiction. And I think if parents know that underlying gene mutation, then they can actually try and support those children.
Yes.
So that, it doesn't actually become a full-blown addiction.
Yeah.
Very true. Very true.
Look, it does worry me because these gaming and screen businesses are massive businesses, like they're billion-dollar businesses, and they're employing very, very clever scientists to try and work out how to get people and how to get our children addicted essentially to their product because that makes them money. And I feel there's a real moral issue here. I mean, this is a societal problem. It's not just a parenting problem. Our society as a whole needs to address this. It's almost like things have moved so quickly, the science just hasn't kept up with it. So we've got no real research on this to show whether or not there is damage going on with the children's brain, or not enough research. And these companies are essentially operating in an unregulated environment. I mean, there's no real regulation for this. And the thing that worries me is at the moment they're inducing these dopamine rewards in their programs in order to manipulate our children's brains, let's face it. And eventually our children are going to get used to that level of stimulation and want more. So what are they going to do next? So what's
frightening.
I mean, they'll find something in order to increase that reward mechanism. And that then just puts more children at risk for computer addiction, which
even if they don't have a genetic susceptibility, because
you're just giving so much of a reward. Like, they're really very clever at doing this.
And I think all adults could say the same. Like, we're all addicted to our phones.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really, I don't know many people who aren't constantly looking at their mobile phones nowadays.
Yeah.
So,
and if we can't regulate that as adults, how can we expect our children to do that?
Well, I think there's, technology is the greatest thing we've got, and it's our biggest curse right now as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I think back to I started college with a manual typewriter. They didn't even have calculators. That's incredible now. And if I would have had back then the access to what I have now, college would have been a whole lot easier. Yeah. However, this addiction mechanism that they've got built into the video game, I think has really become very toxic. There's a, 2008 article in New York Times talked about the hikikomori syndrome out of Japan, and where they had at the time 800,000 to 1 million kids between the ages of 9 and 20 something that were shut-in kids. That hermit syndrome is what it's called. And all they want to do is stay in a room and play their video games, and parents brought their food to their room and everything else. It's just incredible that they've lost this population. But once you crawl into the games, some of these kids have a very difficult time of getting out. Number one, the middle school years, the toughest years we go through, I think, for everybody. And their high school years are all about developing a role identity. It was a study out of Baylor University that really captured the essence of what you're supposed to be doing during this time is developing what your role in society is, what your role in the family is, what your role in school is, how you're going to develop yourself, the skill sets you need in order to become successful. And so, you know, people used to be into taking karate lessons. They used to be into different sports. They used to be into debate. They used to be into a lot of things that no longer have their interest, because that takes an appreciation of delayed gratification, where video games are all about teaching instant gratification only and give you just enough satisfaction. It's kind of like a slot machine. It's going to pay off every once in a while just so you'll keep playing. And it's the same basic concept. They've got this down to a science now, and it's just amazing how they've taken our children away from us and put them into this cyber world. And so they, you know, they stop spending time working on themselves, and they start spending time developing cyber entities that don't exist and playing cyber games that don't exist. And I'm sorry, all the skill sets that they say they're gaining from playing video games prevents them from our society standards, which is, in order for you to progress through society, you have to have certain levels of education, which means that is some pretty boring stuff.
Yeah.
And you've got to be able to have that delayed gratification enough to put up with a lot of, you know what, to get your final piece of paper, so that you can go, you know, that next ceiling won't be there for you, and you can go to that next level. So this is all quite interesting how they've got it set up now. And that's what we're finding in a lot of the young people that do make it into the workforce. Their work ethic is very poor, because it's all about instant gratification. I want it now. I want that manager job. I don't want to work and build up 20 years to get to that position.
Yeah.
You know, I want it now. And so that's, and it also takes away all the, I think, the creativity. And, you know, when I was growing up, we had no video games. I mean, you have a broomstick and a walnut, and you've got a baseball game, you know. We made our own games. These kids, these two words, I'm so bored, these three words, I'm so bored, comes out of all of their mouths, and it's like, figure out something to do. Come on, there's plenty of things around you. But they don't have that ability to say, okay, I want to do this. What do I have around here to make it work? And they just can't put that together. So the games in general have really, that's where they've hurt the role identity of the individuals, and they've hurt the ability to delay gratification. And that's showing up in the in a study I did on male success rate in college. And in the US, the last time that males and females graduated at equal numbers in our universities was 1981. Before then, males had dominated since the dawn of universities. In 1994, it took the biggest reduction in males' success rate in college. That was the year that Mortal Kombat came out. And since then, it's been steadily declining. So now we're down to 38% to 62% females over males graduating from college. Not that the males aren't there, but they never walked the stage. And so then we're losing a cadre of that susceptible little group of guys that we know probably had that predisposition, were a little awkward, but they would have grown up to be the engineers with the little tape on their glasses and little pocket protectors and scientists, and we need those people, but we've lost that group of them, you know, to the games, and it's worrying me terribly, and I wish I wish this could go out to everybody, because it's a big concern. I don't know how we can fight video game industry. There's just no way to do it. It's kind of like the tobacco industry when they kept putting more and more nicotine to make us more addicting, you know, and they've got the money, they've got the attorneys, they've got the scientists say there's nothing wrong with the games. They're not addicting. But, you know, that's why
it's also like the food industry now.
Yeah,
so
they're not taking any responsibility.
No, they're putting MSG, which is addictive in our food, sugar, which is addictive, so salt, so processed food is so highly addictive, and they've got a whole team of food scientists behind that, making sure whatever they put on the shelf is highly addictive.
Right.
And we're supposed to be able to regulate what we eat.
Yeah, and regulate what our children eat.
Yeah.
So they have this amazing, these scientists who create this bliss point in food, and then as mothers, we've got to compete with that.
With home-cooked meals.
With home-cooked meals. I mean, how are we supposed to do that when they're adding all these chemicals?
Yeah.
And then we have the issues with obesity, but no one is putting responsibility back on the food companies because they've got all the money.
Even though there's so much scientific research about the link between MSG and obesity.
Yeah.
But still, it's amazing. I don't understand why these big companies are able to get away with these things.
And look, it was interesting because Steve Jobs, before he died, admitted that none of his children were allowed to use any of the devices that he created. He said, no way would I let them use it.
That's really scary.
That is really scary. And they're saying that out of the tech industry, most of those executives within that industry do not let their children use these devices or these software, all the software, because they know exactly what they're designed to do. So we're getting a situation where people with money who can afford to have someone to pay to entertain their children. These children aren't having as many issues as people who don't have that money, where both parents are working, and where you're right, it's too hard to fight the tide in terms of their children, and they're just letting it happen because they don't know any better, Ron. They don't know what these companies are doing to addict their children.
I don't think parents understand the consequences and the impact on the brain.
Well, they don't know about dopamine. They don't know about reward deficiency syndrome. They don't know any of these things, and they're being blindly led into an area where they just simply don't have the knowledge that they need.
Yeah.
Well, I think about, I ask parents all the time, if your child was drinking in 3 or 4 hours a night, alcohol, would you have alcohol in the house? It's the easy answer. No, we wouldn't have it.
Yeah.
But when you have a child that has become addicted and they would do anything just to be left alone and play their games, they're no longer part of the family for 3, 4, 5 hours a day or a night. And then 12 hours is not uncommon for a lot of these kids to game on the weekends. And yet they allow that still to be in the house. It's like, I don't understand. It is an addiction. It's tearing your family apart. Is it just the basic concept of addiction should be able to come through loud and clear and say, we're not going to have this anymore. At least a lot of parents I know have chosen no video gaming during the week.
Yeah.
That's a big difference. And then use it sparingly on the weekend, but you have to balance it with social activities, face-to-face. Texting is not communication.
But the issue too with these gaming companies is because they've got on board with parental concerns in terms of socialization, and now they've built socialization into these games. So the games now have teams. So you and your mates play together, and they're in, now you actually have to turn up at a time so you don't let your team down. So they're really clever, Ron. They just seem to be ahead of us every step of the way, and it becomes such a. I mean, I know I've got teenage boys myself. It's such a social part of what they do and how they communicate at school that it's almost as though they are left behind in a peer-related way if they don't get involved. And this is the pressure that parents are put under when their children are saying to them, but everyone else is doing it, and we miss out. It's just so difficult.
It is a really hard thing when you've got that constant, all my friends are doing it.
Yeah.
And that's why it is an issue for the whole society.
I think so. I really believe it becomes a societal issue. And I don't think parents can cope with this on their own. I think governments need to be stepping in, and I think these big companies need to be taking some social responsibility for the effect that they're having. I mean, the fact that this is having an effect such that young men are not graduating from university, that is a huge social impact. And they need to take some social responsibility for that. So,
and it's going to cause an adjustment in the population as well.
Yeah.
Because when you think about it, college-educated females cannot marry a non-college educated male, so there's going to be less eligible husbands.
Yeah.
And so there's going to be less population. It's in a spiral down now, and we know obviously as sad as it is that females make less than males with equal jobs, which is, at least it is over in the U.S. here.
Same here.
And now we're having more of a shift towards a female dominant society, and yet what are we going to do about it? But the amount of money spent by all of the industry, whether it's the pharmacy, the drug companies, whether it's the companies that build the video games, all these companies, they put millions and millions of dollars into these politicians' pockets.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? You can't fight that. You can't. All the little research that we can do at the ground level, universities aren't taking this up, because guess what? Universities is all about
funding.
It's terrible, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is. It's a vicious cycle
all over again.
Oh, it really is.
I think what's going to happen in the coming years, I think there's going to be a shift. There has to be. The pendulum's going to have to swing, and there's going to have to be a cadre of young people that refuse to play the game.
Yeah.
Refuse to take part.
And maybe that's correct. If it's about educating parents. Parents need to have some power, and I think we need to be placing that power and that responsibility in the politicians' lap, so that we're creating more stress and pressure on them than those companies are.
Well, the thing I see mostly with parents, when you ask them, what do you want for your child? I want my child to be happy.
Yeah.
And I tell them, I'm sorry, that's not your job. Your job is not to make your children happy. Your job is to prepare them to become independent. And if you make their life totally joy and happy, they will never leave the nest. So if you make their life miserable by saying no gaming, you got to get out there and earn a living. So you're going to have to go to college so that you can move out of this house, since it's such a terrible place to live. Then you've done your job.
If I leave home, I can game. That's right.
They ask you to say, I'm trying to be a good parent here, because my job is to launch you into adulthood, not to have you stay in the back bedroom the rest of your life.
Yeah, that's right. I've just David Gillespie's just written a new book on screen use in the teen brain. That was quite interesting. So he talks about the fact that rates of teenagers engaging in addictive behaviours like drinking, smoking, sex and drug use has actually dropped. And you've talked about that, the fact that violent crimes have also dropped. So kids are engaging in computer games to fulfil that addictive issue, rather than doing the old school.
Yeah, okay. Oh, that's a positive. I can look at it that way.
Oh, yeah. So there's people out there saying, oh no, it's all good, everything's dropping, but our rates of anxiety and depression and mental health issues within our children are, of course, increasing. And he talks about the teenage brain being particularly receptive to addiction because of the reduction in GABA needed to precipitate puberty.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. The only studies I could find were in monkeys. Have you heard about this?
I haven't heard about that. I saw your little note on that email about that, and that is kind of curious. But when you think about the brain, we know that GABA is a relaxatory brain chemical.
Yeah.
And the brain is binary. It's zeros and ones. It's excitatory brain chemistry and it's relaxatory brain. And somewhere in there, you got to seek a balance. It's the homeostatic regulatory system that Roy John spoke about. I actually got a poster of that up on my wall in the office, because it's such a great thing to understand that the brain is going to adapt to its environment, but it has to have this balance. Now, depression and anxiety obviously is more on the stressor side, more on the excitatory neurochemistry side.
Yeah.
And when, you know, when we exhaust, when we play games for an extended period of time, what happens is we are primarily more excitatory. If you think about the guys, I'm a military veteran of Vietnam and Desert Storm. And I tell you, when I got back from Vietnam, I was in no way, shape, or form ready to go back to college. You're totally excitatory. My brain was set up for, you know, for
Fight, flight.
military action, right? Fight, flight, or freeze. Mostly fight or flight. And it took a while for that brain to come back to homeostasis to become where I could go back to school and do something again. And that's just where the kids are. They're in that. And so, was I anxious? Yes. Was I depressed? Yes. You know, and because my brain was saturated with excitatory neurochemistry because of what I've experienced. So that's where the link is right there. It's self-imposed. And then you mentioned about the dopamine. It's very, you got to understand dopamine. We can exhaust our dopamine system through constant stimulation.
Yes.
And just like other homeostatic systems in the brain, you have to have more and more of a challenge, more and more excitement, more and more of a thrill, more and more of whatever, in order to get the same aha that you got the first time from playing it. So there's the addiction part. And at some point in time, what you have is, if you take away the one source of their dopamine, they cannot sit and watch the sunset and get any pleasure. Their lives are miserable because they no longer can get pleasure from normal things, from a relationship, from a conversation, from a song. It's all about the high stimulation of the game.
Yeah.
And so that dopamine is back to the, how do we fix something like this? Well, we've been successful in heavy gamers with doing neurofeedback, which has been a great advantage, because then we can, just like we work a lot with substance abuse, it's an addiction.
Yeah.
The dopamine system's been hijacked. Same basic concept. We're going to go in, we're going to reestablish that system so that they can enjoy life without their addiction.
Yeah.
And that's the part that's really putting these brains back together. But however, they're totally susceptible to not just going back to the games, but because of this addictive nature that this gene that they turned on, that they're susceptible to going, okay, so I'm going to start drinking now, or I'm going to start cutting it.
Looking for it somewhere. Yeah.
Well, you're always going to crave that dopamine hit, aren't you?
Especially if your dopamine system is, you know, not great. So if you do have issues with those particular genes,
yeah, exactly,
you're going to have that natural need to crave dopamine.
Right. Exactly.
It's a hard one, because if you've got the DRD2, sounds more like something out of Star Wars.
Yeah,
but if you have that gene mutation, you've got 30 to 40% less dopamine receptors in the brain. So then you're already at this real disadvantage in terms of dopamine.
Yeah.
And I kind of wonder if those are the people who are, you know, the ones that go and skydive.
Oh, totally.
Jump off.
Sure.
Yeah, just to try and find some kind of dopamine hit.
Yeah.
Sure.
So how do we help parents, Ron? How do we help parents deal with this?
How do we help mums?
I mean, if you've got a child who's having massive meltdowns as a youngster, like really young, every time you take a screen off them, I think you can pretty much assume they've already got some kind of issue. And I think at that point, some assistance and understanding the fact that this is your child and you need to be extra careful, it is only a good thing. It just gives you information so that you know how to help that child.
Right.
But in terms of everyday children, you know, how do parents deal with the fact that these children they're being constantly marketed to? They are manipulated in terms of making sure that, in terms of their social pressure and their peer pressure, that they are engaged in these activities. You know, how do you help parents deal with that?
Well, I think the main thing we can do is educate them, like we're doing right now. I think that there are a lot of parents just don't know.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest thing. I had no idea. you know, it seemed like a very easy thing to do. You know, it's almost like when they came out with pacifiers.
Mm.
You know, let's get this and stick it in its mouth. You know, it won't cry for a while.
Yeah.
But we've got to see, you know, the education is the number one key. And I think most mothers, fathers, they want to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
We do have a lot of studies out there that have found the more hours spent gaming, the lower their grades and the worse their behavior. That's pretty constant. That's a fact.
Yeah.
Putting up boundaries, and I think that's where therapy can really come in, and family therapy particularly, is how to set appropriate boundaries in the family.
Yeah.
And then spending time trying to get your child interested in something that can make them a living someday, robotics or electronics or something that is going to be out there that, you know, they think, well, gosh, I just built this, you know, instead of putting
And
on.
that's how they get their dopamine hit.
Yeah.
Exactly. Showing them about the delayed gratification, how it's worth it. But that's where parenting, I think, has to step back up and say, okay, my job is to get this child launched into adulthood. Get this child launched into adulthood. I should have turned that off. But and if we can get them launched into adulthood, that means we're going to have to give them some sort of skill set. My parents bought popular mechanics and popular science and put them in the bathroom. Well, what else are you going to do in the bathroom besides look at pictures? You know, so that's where I got interested in science. You know, it's kind of like cool pictures, but you know, exposure to these kind of things. There's a lot of stuff, and after visiting your wonderful country, there's a lot of things I could do down there. Just have fun as a child.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a beautiful country. There's so much to do,
Mm.
and it's relatively safe, which I really like. So
Yeah.
It is.
you know, it is. But this is activity. This is things that that parents would have to spend family time again. We're going camping. Well, it sounds like a terrible thing to do, but camping can be a lot of fun for kids. We'll teach you how to build a fire. We'll teach you how to put out a fire so you don't catch everything on fire. You know, it's these basic family things.
Yeah.
Teach them to fish. Teach them to, you know, to enjoy nature. Teach them all this other kind of stuff. But it takes time. It takes an investment, and it takes tearing them away from their consoles and listening to them throw fits.
Yeah.
Eventually they'll wear out and they'll go to sleep, and then they'll wake up and they'll say, okay, what are we going to do now? So
Yeah.
I think that's where it's making a shift back to the family and back to taking that responsibility to find an interest for your child that's going to lead them into their future.
And look, the positive side effect of that is you're building connection and a relationship with your child. And I think that's one of the things that parents find the hardest with these children when they're so engrossed in their screens, is that we lose that relationship and that connection that we had with our child because they're more connected to this thing.
Exactly.
So yeah, so I
think
that's good advice.
Ron, I was wondering, when you've been looking at the brain maps of people with addiction, is there some kind of similarity along?
Usually there is. We've got a frontal midline slowing right over the cingulate. It's an addictive quality, whether it's an obsessive compulsive, whether it's an oppositional defiant, whether it's an addiction. It's all in the same area. It's right in the center in the midline.
Mm-hmm.
And we do find this, and it's high, it's slower, meaning that it's excessive slow wave activity over fast wave activity. And basically, they disengage their frontal lobes. And once you disengage your frontal lobes, there's no conductor in charge. And so that makes a big difference when it comes to motivation, because what we see in these children is a terrible motivation. There's no motivation to do anything but sit there and be a life support system for a cyber entity that doesn't exist.
Because what I've found is a lot of the clients we see with the COMP gene mutation, it's actually the ones with the fast COMP gene that have the issues, because COMP is all about the clearance of dopamine, adrenaline, noradrenaline. But if their COMP's actually working too quickly, they're losing dopamine too quickly. And so they have that dopamine deficiency. And then we need to support that somehow, because it means that they have difficulty focusing, they have difficulty with motivation, and of course they're going to have difficulty with addiction because they're trying to find that dopamine reward, which they can't naturally get. We've been trying to support these kids with L-tyrosine, because tyrosine is a precursor to dopamine. So trying to find that biochemical balance and support that. Have you ever tried things like that in your clinic?
Well, back to the brain chemistry part. This is a hypothesis I developed years ago, that there's two types of gamers, male gamers. There's the low testosterone gamers and there's the high testosterone gamers.
Yeah.
And high testosterone have everything, and they're yelling, they're screaming, they're drinking while they're doing it. I mean, these are the guys that are out there so competitive it's through the roof. Those aren't the ones I'm worried about. It's the low testosterone gamers that really are the ones that are the nice kids as long as you leave them alone, let them play their games. They're just really endearing young people, but there's no motivation. It's like, and so that's that population. Well, how do you increase testosterone? You exercise. Are these kids exercising? No.
Yeah.
You put them into some sort of weight training, not bulking up, but weight training. That increases testosterone. You know, so all these things that you're talking about, dopamine, I think, are a symptom of a young person who was on a path to be a healthy individual, got hijacked to being a sedentary individual, and which further depletes testosterone, which further depletes dopamine and everything else that goes along with it. And there is no drive, there is no motivation. When you think about what you just said, that's all in what we have in very high testosterone individuals.
Yeah.
It's not what we have in low testosterone individuals.
What we try and do in the clinic for parents when they come to us with these issues is we do try and support the child biologically. So we try and work out what's going on biologically with this child.
Right.
Obviously, we look at the brain. So how can we support this child biologically in order to make this transition
a bit easier
on the parent? And also so that they don't have to watch them 24/7 because as you say, the possibility of them becoming addicted to other things is also very high. So
Right.
ensuring that that child is or has the best possible chance of living a good life with natural motivation without having to become addicted to anything in order to get some joy, is a really good thing to do. So knowing your child, I think, and knowing the risks that that child might have of developing these disorders is such a great thing.
I think when you know your child's genetics as well, it takes away the blame.
Yeah.
Because then, and for them as well.
Yeah, and the frustration with the child. If you understand your child and the difficulties that they've got, and the susceptibilities they've got to this, you know, no amount of screaming and yelling really is going to work if you don't understand what's going on for this child and the challenges they have.
And then support those challenges.
Yeah, and again, that then builds relationship and connection with the child so that they trust that they can come to you when they're in trouble. They're not constantly going to get hammered.
Yeah, because I think it's one thing to kind of say, all right, let's just cut everything out. But as you say, as soon as they leave home, they'll just find some other form of addiction.
Yeah.
So it is supporting.
And helping that child understand themselves.
Exactly.
So they have some self-awareness about this.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. We do, if we can catch them early enough, and I think there's a lot of them we can change the course. Now, I have found a curious thing that children who are good at music and math or either tend not to get addicted to video games.
Okay.
I don't understand it. And something in the arrangement of their brain seems to be superior, and there's an inoculation against getting video game addicted. You might look out for that, and so therefore, if you think, well, if they could start them into a musical instrument, or start them into math, when you think about that, and it's about delayed gratification, but there's something in the brain that clicks, that puts the rest of the world in some sort of perspective, I guess. So that may be something we could look at in the future.
Yeah.
I know these schools with big music programs and things like this, their addiction is much lower than any of the other schools, for instance. And So that's a curious thing that I've come across after doing all these cases, and I really can't explain it, but maybe we could use it in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I love that. Okay.
Might be due to the reduced stress response, because music has that impact on people.
Yeah, it does. But it's also very stimulatory, you know, it's very stimulatory to the brain. So,
and it's also cross hemisphere because you're using both hands, both feet, and all this other kind of stuff with certain instruments. And, you know, I think that's that somehow, some way it's helping wire the brain more appropriately.
Yeah, I love it.
That's cool.
Okay. Take up music.
Yeah, everyone.
Yes. It's simple if we could come up with something to say, well, let's try this instead. If they ever want to play a musical instrument, man, I would jump on that with both feet. Say, let's go.
Yeah.
Let's go get that instrument. You know, get drumming pads of those so you don't have to listen to the drums all the time. But, you know, they put headsets on and they can still get the rhythm. But that really helps. It really helps the brain in getting it balanced. And I think that's the big thing, because brains that are phase locked, as you know, anterior hypocoherent alpha, you know, they'll be moody, they'll be hard to console, they'll be rigid, all this other kind of stuff. And where if you open their brains up to getting that right side shut down, so it's not dominant, you're not in fight or flight all the time, and getting that analytical kicked in on the left, then I think that's where you get the balance. And it's all about it.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Awesome.
Well, we have great concerns for Generation Z. Poor little things. Goodness me.
We've left quite a legacy, haven't we?
We have.
Generation X. Done well. We've left them with a corrupt food industry, corrupt pharmaceutical industry, corrupt gaming industry.
Well, it's interesting that a lot of children now are actually coming forward and speaking politically, saying this is, you know, this is not on. And I can see where their frustration comes from, because essentially we've just stepped back and let it happen.
And I think that's maybe where you need to take your concepts to, is to the children themselves. Because I don't think they understand.
No.
You know, and I think many of them do want to become independent. I think many of them do want to be successful in life. And just like we took to our children, we said, I'm sorry, children, you cannot drink until you're 18 or 21. I mean, that was put as a rule because we taught them about the hazards of drinking. The same thing with smoking. We put those out there, but we haven't really educated them to the hazards of excessive gaming, for instance.
We have, and that's because we don't know, you know. And like you say, it's because parents don't know. We really don't. This is all so new and it's happened so fast.
There's really not enough research out there to push anything yet.
No. And parents just keep getting mixed messages. So, you know, and it's at the point really where the kids know more about it than we do. So we're in this terrible situation, you know. So really.
Well, like I tell the boys, that I said, if you sacrifice these years, you know, the years between middle school and high school, probably the 7 worst years of your life. If you sacrifice these and put in all the effort you can into becoming a good student, then you get into college, you'll be successful with that. You know, the payoff is tremendous compared to those years that you're sacrificing for, because then you don't control yourself, you don't have any money, you can't drive most of the time, dating is probably out of the question, but you're sacrificing those years of your life for the rest of your life. You know, if your middle school and high school years are the best of your life, they will be the best of your life. You won't have a future. And that's what the message has got to go to these kids. This is a choice that they have to make. And we've done it in a lot of other areas. You know, I think we just need to do it in the video game on a basic level from what we do know. We know male success rate is dropping. We know that grades drop. We know that that behavior gets worse. We know that pro-social communication goes down the toilet. It's just such a sacrifice for a game, for a game that doesn't exist. And that's, you know, I feel kind of the same way about contact sports with head injuries. It's not worth carrying your kids' ability to make a future living for themselves by having them bang their heads together out there all the way through middle and high school.
Mm.
It's really
brain is most vulnerable.
And you shake their hands and there's not a callous one on their hands. They're not going to be a laborer. So what are they going to do? If they take their brains out and they've got no way to make a living with a skill of some sort, they're lost. They're lost generation. I guess that's where it may be their children that says, I can't do this. I can't do what my parents did. I've got to do something with my life and stay away from it. So I think it's going to swing, but I think we still got about 20 years before that swing comes, because I don't think we can outdo the video game industry in regard to making a big deal about having them stop doing this.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen. So I think that's what
if only these industries actually invested all this time and money into creating a schooling system that was just as stimulating as gaming. So if you do online learning and it's just as stimulating as doing a gaming.
Yeah.
Imagine what these kids could learn, and in an environment that they really
enjoy and connect with. Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's where they should spend their billions.
That would be great. Do that.
I think that, though, you take board games, Monopoly. No person who ever was a champion at Monopoly ever became a CEO of a company. I think it takes more than just the two-dimensional. I think taking that real world experience, that face-to-face experience out, is really where we're suffering as humans now, because humans are based upon social experience. And when you take out that social experience, I don't care if you're playing with your friends or somebody across the world or across the country, it's not the same thing as having a friend. These kids have very few friends.
Yeah.
And that's about interaction with each other. Just like I'm saying, gaining these skill sets in different things that we used to have growing up, the Scouts, for instance, or something like this. That made a big difference. I always said that if we took these little kids and we put them into a deserted island with an instruction manual of how to survive, and we came back in 30 days, I think they would all be okay. Because they would figure it out. They would have to. As long as they don't have to, they're not going to, because that's what they're taught. Instant gratification. You do for me. And when I can't figure it out, or I can't fix something, or I don't even want to attempt to fix something, just buy me a new one. That's what's lost. This ability to come up against the problem and figure out a solution. And I think that's part of what we're losing in our young people, is that ability to fix this. And I think that's where maybe if you got together with school and had a question and answer with the kids, here's the problem, what's the solution? They may come up with something we've never thought of.
Yeah, that's a good point.
We're the only ones who can come up with a solution to this issue, because they understand it so much better than we do.
They do.
We're completely out of touch.
Completely lost.
With technology.
That's right. It just takes listening to them.
And, we talked about it's more of a male issue than a female issue. And we talked about that, when you and I spoke back in Australia about the differences in the smaller amygdalas in females. They don't get the same charge, the same, dump of dopamine as males do. So it is more exciting to males just by their biology.
Yeah.
And so I think that those are the ones that, those females out there, they seem to get it. They'll put down and they'll delay it. It's in their programming, because if you're going to be a mom, you have got to be able to go, tolerate frustration tolerance and delay gratification and do all the hard stuff, and that's in your nature. Gosh, if we could transport that into some of the guys, I think we'd be a lot better off. But how do we do that? This is the frustrating part. And I think boys
are just so susceptible anyway, aren't they? Because their brain is still developing. They haven't got those certain parts of the brain, like the prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed, so they're not going to make good decisions. It's really a tricky scenario.
It is.
I know it. It is good to talk about it, though. It's good to open up the dialogue.
And I really hope that this helps mums to have some idea about what is happening for their children when they are locked into these screens. And I hope we've given them some ideas about what they might be able to do if that's happening for their child. So thank you, Dr. Ron. You're a legend.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ron.
That was brilliant. Your knowledge and experience are invaluable.
Well, anything I can do to help, and any solutions you come up with, please pass them on. If I come up with anything, I'll be passing it down your direction as well, because we've got to work together on this. This is a serious issue, and starting the dialogue is the best thing in the world.
Absolutely. Love it. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you.